From today's gospel reading, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Today is the feast of Christ the King, the very last Sunday of the church year. It's a celebration Sunday, hence the color white for our liturgy. And like any New Year's Eve, this liturgical year, we take a moment to reflect on the past 12 months. This year, more than most, has been a strange, challenging journey, not only as individuals, but as a global human community. For us, as people committed to walking the way of love in Jesus, this Sunday is a chance to think about the meaning of Christ's reign in heaven and on earth, and more specifically, what it means for Christ to reign in our hearts, giving shape to all of our lives. In our gospel reading, the reign of Christ is told through the story of the sheep and the goats, a parable. And it's a parable about God's kingdom. Jesus speaks of a time where the Son of Man returns and all people are judged before the King. In the case of the sheep and the goats, both groups are surprised by the King's judgment. The response of both groups is the same. They ask, Lord, when was it that we saw you? This element of surprise points to something deeper. The King's judgment is not only about how we act with those we see as our community or family, but also those who we understand to be members of the King's family. We see them as members of God's family. At the most basic level, the difference between the sheep and the goats is their capacity for compassion. In other words, the difference is about how much each group exercises their hearts as a muscle of loving kindness. The sheep are able to expand their hearts. They live without fear of scarcity, knowing that love is the one thing which grows when you give it away. The sheep live looking outward towards the needs of those around them, acknowledging and meeting the suffering of people in the world. They also see themselves as responsible for responding to the needs of those who might not fit in to their family or community. They see all of those they welcome as a point of contact, as the ones to meet with compassion and an open heart. A news story that I heard a few years ago really resonates this concept. In San Rafael, California, Gonzalo Ortero was on his daily commute to his job as a companion and coordinator for guide dogs for the blind. While driving on the highway to work, he noticed a car in a ditch just off the side of the road. Gonzalo said that he nearly drove past without a second thought. And then for reasons that he can't even quite explain, he decided to check it out. Gonzalo said, I was a heartbeat away from going to work. And at the last second, I don't know why, I just got this feeling. I said to myself, I've got to check it out. Well, when he got out of his car and got a closer look, he found a 60-year-old man who was unconscious at the wheel. And with his foot stuck on the gas, there were flames closing in. Moments later, an off-duty firefighter also happened to stop, and together with Gonzalo, the two were able to pull the man's body from the car before it burst into flames. Shortly after, the driver of the car was brought to a hospital that was nearby. Clearly, the story of Gonzalo is extraordinary. Not all of us will be put in the situation of needing to pull someone out of a burning car, but for as extraordinary as it is, there are at least two things to learn from this situation. First is that Gonzalo followed his intuition, responding to this person in need. He listened to that still small voice inside of him, urging him to check it out. For us, in our faith life, that is what we do. We cultivate ways to pay attention to that still small voice inside of us, the intuition that we get when we encounter someone in need. To be sure, sometimes it's difficult to do this and inconvenient. We can end up feeling conflicted when we're asked for money by someone on the street, and especially during a pandemic. But offering money isn't the only option. There are many ways to support people in need. We must remember that we're called to do what we can, when we can, with an open heart. So instead, we could perhaps buy someone a bag of groceries, or if we're not able to do that, we can refer them to an agency that can help. No matter what we end up doing, we can always treat them with dignity and respect, looking a person in their eyes as we acknowledge their need. We can also make a lasting difference by giving of our time and talent and money to organizations committed to those in need, whether it be volunteering at a food bank or checking on those who live alone, or even answering phones for a crisis line. The important thing is that through practicing this ministry of presence, we see the other person as human, just as we are human, treating them with the dignity that God gave them, whether or not we can remedy what's going on with them. The second lesson from Gonzalo's story, helping the man in the burning car, is that he saw the person in need as part of the human family. It sounds completely obvious to say that, but even Jesus needs to remind us of this when he says, "Just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Whoever that person in the car ended up being, no matter their gender or age, their social or legal status, in that moment, Gonzalo came to the aid of a member of the human family. We must resist the temptation to objectify others in order to gain a false identity of belonging. As baptized in Christ, Christ becomes the source of our belonging as he invites us to live in compassion towards others. For Gonzalo, in the interview, he went on to say, "If someone is in trouble, you help. It's what I'd want someone to do for me. The reign of Christ is brought about through ordinary acts of wholeness and connection with each other every day. We might not rescue someone from a burning car, but even in this pandemic season, it can happen. Those moments of connection can happen while we're waiting in line at the grocery store. Maybe we let someone in the traffic line when we're merging on the freeway, and even helping someone get to an appointment that can't drive themselves. As we celebrate today, we are asked to move from looking inward to looking outward, so our hearts can listen to the hurt of the world and inspire our hands into caring for others in Christ's name. In our psalm today, we're reminded that our praise of God naturally propels us to thanksgiving. We're able to do the work of God in the world because we've been nourished by his loving presence. When we know God's presence is with us and the community of faith is there holding us, we can offer ourselves in service to the world. So moving into a new church year and celebrating Thanksgiving this week, may we give thanks for the ways that we've been met by Christ's healing hands. And in the year ahead, may we continue to listen to those in need through faith and service. In Christ's name, amen.